The clock on the library wall showed 9:47 p.m., and most students had already gone back to their dorms. Finals week was hitting everyone hard. But David preferred studying when the place was quiet. He sat at his usual corner table on the third floor, surrounded by psychology textbooks and empty coffee cups that he kept forgetting to throw away. David was 20 years old and had always been what teachers call a good student, but needs to participate more. He wasn't shy exactly, but he found it easier to listen than to speak up in class. Group projects made him nervous, and he usually ended up doing most of the work himself rather than coordinating with others. Tonight was no different. He had spread out all his notes and was highlighting key concepts. For tomorrow's developmental psychology exam, the library felt peaceful at this hour. Only a few dedicated students remained, each lost in their own world of textbooks and stress. David liked it this way. During the day, when the library was packed, he felt overwhelmed by all the conversations, the sound of chairs scraping, and people constantly walking by his table. But now, in the quiet evening atmosphere, he could actually focus. He had been studying the same chapter about social development for the past hour. The material was interesting enough, but his mind kept wandering. David had always wondered why. Some people seemed so comfortable in social situations while others, like himself, found them exhausting. Reading about attachment styles and social bonding felt like trying to understand a foreign language that everyone else spoke fluently. His phone buzzed with a text from his roommate asking if he wanted to grab late-night pizza with some friends from their floor. David stared at the message for a moment, then typed back a polite excuse about needing to study. It wasn't entirely untrue, but he also knew that sitting around a crowded pizza place, trying to keep up with multiple conversations, would leave him feeling drained for days. As he returned to his textbook, he heard footsteps approaching. David glanced up to see Lisa, a girl from his developmental psychology class, walking toward his table with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a tired expression on her face. Lisa was everything David wasn't when it came to social situations. She participated actively in class discussions, formed study groups effortlessly, and seemed to know half the campus by name. She came from a large family where Sunday dinners meant 20 people crowded around one table, where hugs were given freely and where personal space was more of a suggestion than a rule. For Lisa, physical affection was as natural as breathing, a pat on the shoulder, a quick hug, sitting close while studying. These gestures came without thought or hesitation. "Hey, David," she said, setting her backpack down near his table. "Mind if I join you? I've been walking around looking for a quiet spot to study, but everywhere else is either too crowded or too dark to read properly." David nodded, though he felt his stomach tighten slightly. He had been enjoying the solitude, the predictable rhythm of reading and note-taking. Now he would need to be aware of another person's presence, to monitor his behavior and make sure he wasn't being antisocial. Still, Lisa had always been kind to him in class, never making him feel awkward when he struggled to answer questions quickly. "Sure, there's plenty of room," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs around his table. He quickly gathered some of his scattered papers to make space for her books. Lisa smiled and pulled out a chair across from him. "Thanks. I feel like my brain is about to explode from all this studying. How are you holding up?" "Okay, I guess. This attachment theory stuff is pretty complex." David held up his textbook, grateful to have something specific to talk about rather than making small talk. "Tell me about it." "I keep mixing up secure and insecure attachment styles." Lisa opened her notebook and pulled out a pen. "My professor says understanding this material will help us work with children better someday, but right now it just feels like memorizing definitions." They fell into a comfortable study rhythm for the next 20 minutes. Lisa would occasionally ask David to explain a concept, and he found that teaching helped him understand the material better too. She had a way of asking questions that didn't make him feel put on the spot, and she actually listened to his answers without interrupting. David began to relax. Maybe having someone else at the table wasn't so bad after all. Lisa was focused on her own work, not trying to fill every silence with conversation. She just happened to be someone who preferred company while studying. The same way David preferred solitude. As the evening wore on, more students left the library. The third floor became even quieter, with just the soft sound of pages turning, and the occasional whisper from somewhere across the room. David found himself stealing glances at Lisa as she worked, noticing how she absently tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or how she would tap her pen against her lips when she was thinking. He had always admired people who seemed so comfortable in their own skin, who moved through the world without second-guessing every interaction. Lisa appeared to be one of those people, confident but not arrogant, friendly but not overwhelming. She treated everyone the same way, with genuine warmth and interest. Around 10:30, Lisa stretched her arms above her head and yawned. "I think my brain has reached its limit for tonight. How about you? Ready to call it quits?" David looked at his notes. He had covered most of what he wanted to review, and his concentration was starting to fade too. Yeah, probably a good idea to stop soon. Lisa started gathering her materials, then paused. "Actually, would you mind if we went over those attachment-style definitions one more time? I feel like I almost have them, but I want to make sure before tomorrow's exam." David nodded, though he noticed something that made him slightly uncomfortable. As Lisa had been packing up, she had moved her chair closer to his side of the table. Not dramatically closer, but enough that he became very aware of the decreased distance between them. He could smell her shampoo, something fruity, and see the small scar on her hand from what looked like an old cooking accident. This awareness of physical proximity always made David feel strange. Not necessarily bad, but heightened and uncertain. He never knew if he was supposed to acknowledge it, ignore it, or move away. Other people seemed to navigate these subtle shifts in personal space without any thought at all. "Okay," David said, opening his textbook to the relevant chapter. "So secure attachment is when children feel safe exploring because they trust their caregiver will be there when they need them." As he began explaining the concepts, David tried to ignore his increased awareness of Lisa's presence beside him. He focused on the words on the page, on making sure his explanations were clear and helpful. But part of his mind remained alert to every small movement she made, every slight shift in her position. He had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, this ordinary study session would become a moment that would stay with both of them for months to come. David was halfway through explaining the difference between anxious and avoidant attachment styles when Lisa suddenly stood up from her chair. He looked up, wondering if she was getting ready to leave, but instead she was scanning the area around their table with a frustrated expression. "Ugh, I'm so tired of sitting in that hard chair," she said, rolling her shoulders. "My back is killing me from hunching over these books all day." She walked around the table, looking at the other chairs, but they were all the same standard library furniture. "I've been studying since this morning, and I feel like my spine is permanently curved." David nodded sympathetically, though he hadn't really noticed any discomfort from his own chair. He was usually so focused on his work that physical discomfort didn't register until much later. "Yeah, these chairs aren't exactly designed for comfort." Lisa continued looking around the corner of the library. The tables nearby were empty now, and most of the chairs had been pushed in for the night. The few that were pulled out looked exactly the same as the one she had been sitting in. She sighed and put her hands on her hips, clearly trying to figure out a solution. "You know what," she said, turning back toward David, "in my family, we never worried about stuff like this. When we had big family gatherings and ran out of chairs, people just shared or found creative solutions." She laughed softly. "My cousins and I used to pile onto one couch to watch movies, and nobody thought twice about it." David smiled politely, though he couldn't really relate to that experience. His own family was much smaller and more formal. Even during holidays, everyone had their designated seat at the dinner table, and personal space was respected without question. The idea of casually sharing furniture seemed foreign to him. Lisa looked back at the empty chairs scattered around nearby tables, then at David's chair, then at her textbook still open on the table. She seemed to be calculating something in her mind. David could see her working through the problem, and he had a strange feeling that whatever solution she was about to propose would somehow involve him. I really need to finish going over these notes with you, she said, more to herself than to him. But I honestly don't think I can sit in another hard chair for even 10 more minutes. My lower back is throbbing. David felt a small knot forming in his stomach, though he couldn't say exactly why. Something about Lisa's tone and the way she kept looking between him and the seating situation made him feel like he should prepare himself for something unexpected. He was used to studying alone, where the only variables he had to manage were his own comfort and concentration. Adding another person always introduced elements he couldn't predict or control. Lisa walked back over to where David was sitting and stood beside his chair. For a moment, still clearly thinking, she absently flipped through a few pages of her notebook. But David could tell her mind wasn't really on the material anymore. She was problem-solving, the way people do when they're trying to figure out the most practical approach to a situation. You know, she said finally, looking down at David with a casual smile. This might sound a little weird, but would you mind if I just sat on your lap while we finished going through these definitions? There really isn't anywhere else comfortable to sit, and we're almost done anyway. The words hit David like a physical impact. His entire body went still, and he felt his mind go completely blank. Not the kind of blank where you're thinking hard about something, but the kind of blank where all thinking just stops entirely. It was as if someone had suddenly spoken to him in a language he had never heard before. Lisa was still standing there beside him, waiting for an answer with the same casual expression she had been wearing all evening. To her, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable solution to a simple problem. She was tired. There were no other comfortable places to sit, and they were friends who had been studying together for hours. In her world, this kind of practical sharing was normal and innocent. But David's world had suddenly shifted into something unfamiliar and overwhelming. He stared at his textbook without really seeing the words on the page. His heart had started beating faster, and he could feel heat rising in his face. Every muscle in his body felt tense, as if he were preparing to run away from something dangerous, even though logically he knew there was no danger. A dozen different thoughts tried to form in his mind at once, but none of them made it to completion. What was he supposed to say? Was this a normal request between friends? Did she mean something more than just sitting? Was he supposed to just say yes? What if he said no? Would that hurt her feelings? Would she think he was weird? What did this mean about their friendship? Lisa tilted her head slightly, and David realized he had been silent for much longer than a normal pause in conversation. She was starting to look a little puzzled, probably wondering why such a simple question was taking so long to answer. But David felt completely paralyzed, caught between not wanting to make her uncomfortable and feeling overwhelmed by the unexpected nature of her request. The rational part of his mind tried to tell him this wasn't a big deal. Friends sat close to each other all the time. People shared space when they needed to. This was just a practical solution to a comfort problem. But the rest of his mind was flooded with uncertainty and a kind of social panic he had experienced before but never learned how to handle smoothly. David's mouth felt dry, and he realized he had been holding his breath without meaning to. He forced himself to breathe normally, but he still couldn't form words. Lisa was still waiting patiently, but he could see confusion starting to creep into her expression. The longer he took to respond, the more awkward the moment was becoming. But he felt trapped in his own inability to react naturally. In the quiet library, with just the two of them in their corner, the silence stretched out like a physical thing. Between them, David could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of Lisa's expectant gaze, could sense that this simple moment was turning into something much more complicated than either of them had anticipated. He knew he needed to say something, anything, but the words just wouldn't come. The silence stretched on, and David could feel it growing heavier with each passing second. His mind was racing, but none of his thoughts seemed to connect to his ability to speak. He kept staring down at his textbook, seeing the words about attachment theory, but not really reading them. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was studying human connection, while completely failing at a basic social interaction. Lisa shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and David could sense her confusion growing. He wanted to look up at her to give some kind of response, but he felt frozen in place. His throat felt tight, and he wondered if other people ever experienced this kind of complete mental shutdown. During normal conversations, part of him was frantically trying to analyze the situation. Lisa had made a simple request, and most people would probably just give a quick yes or no answer without all this internal drama. But David's mind kept spiraling through possibilities and consequences. What if he said yes and then felt uncomfortable the whole time? What if he said no and Lisa thought he was rejecting her as a person? What if there was some social rule he was supposed to know that would make this decision obvious? Meanwhile, another part of his brain was remembering other times when unexpected physical contact had made him freeze up, like in elementary school, when his teacher put her hand on his shoulder during a test, and he couldn't concentrate on anything except the weight of her hand for the rest of the period. Or in high school, when a classmate hugged him goodbye on the last day of school, and he just stood there with his arms at his sides, not knowing how to respond. David had always wondered if other people felt the same way but just hid it better, or if he was somehow different in a way he didn't fully understand. Physical contact wasn't scary exactly, but it was unpredictable. It required a kind of spontaneous response that he never felt ready for. Lisa cleared her throat softly, and David finally forced himself to look up at her. Her expression had changed from casual expectation to genuine concern. She wasn't annoyed or impatient, just confused about why her simple question had created such a long pause. "David, are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You look like you're thinking really hard about something." This direct question about his state of mind somehow made everything worse. Now he wasn't just struggling with her original request, but also with how to explain why he was struggling. How could he tell her that something she saw as perfectly normal felt overwhelming to him? How could he make her understand without sounding like he was making a big deal out of nothing? David started, then stopped. His voice came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. I mean. Lisa's eyebrows drew together with worry. She had never seen David look so uncomfortable before. In class, he was quiet but seemed confident about the material. During their study sessions, he was always calm and helpful. This frozen, almost panicked version of him was completely new to her. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked, taking a small step back from his chair. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable or anything. I was just thinking practically, like when there aren't enough seats at a restaurant and people just figure it out." Her step backwards somehow made David feel even worse. Now he was not only failing to respond to her request, but he was also making her feel bad about asking. This was exactly the kind of social mess he always worried about creating. Lisa was being kind and practical, and he was turning it into an awkward situation through his own inability to just give a simple answer. "No, you didn't," David said quickly, then trailed off again. He rubbed his forehead with one hand, feeling frustrated with himself. "You didn't do anything wrong. Lisa waited patiently, but David could see that she was trying to figure out what was happening. Her natural warmth and openness, which usually made conversations flow easily, seemed to be making this situation more complicated. She was used to people responding naturally to her friendly suggestions, not freezing up like she had asked something impossible. Other students at distant tables occasionally looked over at them, probably wondering why they were having such an intense conversation in whispers. David became aware of these glances and felt his anxiety increase. Now it wasn't just about responding to Lisa, but about the fact that their interaction was becoming noticeable to others. David's hands were resting on his textbook, and he noticed that they had started trembling slightly. This physical sign of his nervousness embarrassed him even more. He pressed his palms flat against the book to try to stop the shaking, But that just made him more aware of how his body was betraying his internal state. Maybe I should just go, Lisa said softly, reaching for her backpack. I think I'm making you uncomfortable somehow, and I don't want to do that. We can review this stuff some other time. The thought of Lisa leaving because of his weird behavior was somehow worse than continuing to struggle through the conversation. David realized that his inability to give her a straightforward answer was actually creating the exact outcome he had been trying to avoid. He was damaging their friendship through his own social paralysis. Wait, he said, more forcefully than he had spoken all evening. Lisa paused in reaching for her bag and looked at him expectantly. Please don't leave because of me. This is hard for me to explain. Lisa sat back down in her original chair across from him, giving him space, but also showing that she wasn't going anywhere. Take your time, she said simply. I'm not in any rush. David took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts into something that would make sense to another person. He had never tried to put this feeling into words before, partly because he had never needed to, and partly because he wasn't sure anyone would understand. I'm not good with, he started, then stopped and tried a different approach. Physical contact is it's complicated for me, even when it's normal and friendly. I never know how to react, and then I overthink everything, and then I freeze. Up like this, Lisa nodded slowly, and David could see understanding starting to dawn in her eyes. Not complete understanding, maybe, but at least recognition that this was about something deeper than just whether or not she could share his chair. The conversation was finally starting to move forward, but David still felt like he was walking through unknown territory without a map. Lisa leaned forward slightly in her chair, her expression soft and attentive. Physical contact is complicated for you, she repeated, not as a question, but as a way of showing she was listening. I think I'm starting to understand. David felt a small wave of relief wash over him. Just having someone acknowledge what he had said without immediately trying to fix it or dismiss it felt like a huge step forward. He had expected Lisa to think he was being dramatic or to suggest that he just needed to relax and get over it. It's not that I don't like people, David continued, feeling slightly more confident now that he had managed to say something coherent. And it's not that I think there's anything wrong with what you asked. It's just that when someone suggests physical contact unexpectedly, my brain kind of shuts down. I start overthinking everything. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. Like what kinds of things do you overthink? David had never been asked to explain his thought process in detail before. Usually, when these situations came up, he would just make an excuse and avoid the whole thing. But Lisa seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental, which made him feel safe enough to be honest. Well, like right now, he said, gesturing vaguely between them. When you asked about sitting on my lap, my mind immediately started racing. I started wondering if that meant something more than just needing a place to sit. Then I wondered if I was supposed to automatically say yes because we're friends. Then I worried that if I said no, you'd think I was rejecting you personally. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. Wow, that's a lot of thoughts happening all at once. Yeah, and then I started thinking about how I never know what the right response is in situations like this. Other people seem to just know instinctively how to handle physical closeness, but I always feel like I'm missing some important information that everyone else has. David paused, realizing he was sharing more than he had ever shared with anyone about this topic. But Lisa was still listening with the same patient attention, not looking uncomfortable or eager to change the subject. And then, David continued, I started remembering other times when I reacted weirdly to physical contact, and I began wondering if you would think I was strange or broken or something. By the time all those thoughts finished cycling through my head, I had been silent for way too long, which made everything even more awkward. Lisa was quiet for a moment, processing what David had told her. When she spoke, her voice was gentle and understanding. That sounds exhausting. Having all those thoughts and worries happening every time someone suggests something physical. It really is, David admitted. And the worst part is that I know most of the time, people aren't trying to make me uncomfortable. Like you tonight, you were just tired and looking for a practical solution. But my brain treats every situation like it's some kind of test I might fail. Lisa shifted in her chair, and David noticed that she was being more conscious of her movements. Now, probably trying not to do anything that might trigger another round of overthinking for him. He appreciated the consideration, but he also felt a little sad that his explanation was already changing how she acted around him. "Can I ask you something?" Lisa said. "Has this always been an issue for you, or is it something that developed over time?" David thought about it for a moment. "I think it's always been there, but I didn't really notice it until I got older. When you're a kid, adults are always picking you up or hugging you or whatever, so you don't have much choice. But as I got older and had more control over social situations, I started realizing that I preferred when people asked first or when I could see it coming." "That makes total sense," Lisa said. "I never thought about it before, but I guess some people need more preparation for physical contact than others. It's not better or worse, just different." David felt another wave of relief. Lisa wasn't treating his explanation like a problem that needed to be solved or a weakness that needed to be overcome. She was just accepting it as information about how he experienced the world. "I'm sorry I made things weird tonight," David said. "I know you were just trying to find a comfortable place to sit, and I turned it into this whole thing." Lisa shook her head firmly. "You didn't make anything weird. If anything, I'm glad this happened because now I understand you better. I grew up in a family where we were always hugging and sitting close and sharing space without thinking about it. I guess I assumed everyone was comfortable with that level of physical closeness." "Most people probably are," David said. "I think I'm more sensitive to it than average. And that's completely okay," Lisa replied. "I have a cousin who's similar. Actually, she always needs a heads up before hugs. And she prefers to sit in her own space during family gatherings. We all just learned to be more mindful around her, and it's never been a big deal." David looked up at Lisa with surprise. "Really? You have a family member who's like this?" "Yeah, my cousin Amy. She explained it to us when she was about 16. She said physical contact felt overwhelming when she wasn't prepared for it, kind of like how some people feel overwhelmed in really loud environments. Once she told us, it was easy to adjust. We just started asking before hugging her or giving her space during movie nights." This revelation made David feel less alone than he had in years. The idea that there were other people who experienced the world similarly, and that families could learn to accommodate different comfort levels, was something he had never considered. "So what happened tonight?" Lisa continued. "It wasn't you being difficult or antisocial. It was just you needing something different than what I was offering. And instead of me getting offended or confused, I should have recognized that and adjusted my approach." David felt like a weight was being lifted off his shoulders. 4 years, he had carried the assumption that his reactions to physical contact were wrong or abnormal. But Lisa was framing it as simply a difference in needs and preferences, something that could be worked with rather than something that needed to be fixed. "Thank you for understanding," David said quietly. "I was worried you'd think I was being ridiculous." "Not at all," Lisa smiled. "If anything, I think you're brave for explaining it to me. It couldn't have been easy to put all those thoughts and feelings into words." The conversation had shifted something fundamental between David and Lisa. As they sat in the quiet library, both of them felt like they understood each other in a way they hadn't before. The tension from earlier had completely dissolved, replaced by a sense of mutual respect and genuine friendship. "So what do we do now?" Lisa asked with a small smile. "I mean, I still have a sore back, and we still need to finish reviewing these attachment styles for tomorrow's exam." David appreciated that she was bringing them back to the practical matter at hand, but now with full awareness of his comfort levels. "Well, what if you grab one of those cushions from the reading area over there?" he suggested, pointing to a seating area with soft chairs and throw pillows. "You could put it on your chair to make it more comfortable." Lisa's face lit up. "That's a perfect solution. Why didn't I think of that earlier?" She got up and walked over to the reading area, returning with a small blue cushion. Much better, she said, settling back into her chair with obvious relief. They returned to their study materials, but the dynamic between them had changed completely. Lisa was more aware of David's personal space, and David felt more relaxed, knowing that she understood his boundaries. Instead of the careful tension that had characterized their earlier interaction, there was now an easy comfort between them. As they worked through the psychology concepts, David found himself participating more actively in the discussion, without the underlying worry about unexpected social demands. He was able to focus fully on the material and even crack a few jokes about the confusing terminology they were trying to memorize. Okay, so anxious attachment is when children become really upset when their caregiver leaves, but then they're still upset when they come back, Lisa said, reading from her notes. Right, because they can't trust that the person will be there consistently, David added. It's like they want closeness, but they're also afraid of it because they've learned that people might leave unpredictably. Lisa paused in her note-taking and looked at David with a thoughtful expression. You know, that actually reminds me a little bit of what you described earlier. Not the same thing exactly, but that feeling of wanting connection, but also feeling uncertain about how to navigate it safely. David considered this comparison. Yeah, I can see that connection. I do want friendships and social relationships. It's just that the physical aspect sometimes feels unpredictable. So I end up being cautious about it. But now that we've talked about it, maybe it doesn't have to feel so unpredictable. Lisa suggested, like, now I know to check in with you before suggesting anything that involves physical contact. And you know that you can just tell me if something makes you uncomfortable. David nodded, feeling a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced before. That would actually help a lot. Just knowing that there's open communication about it takes away most of the anxiety. They continued studying for another hour, and David noticed how different the experience felt compared to the beginning of the evening. Lisa made several small gestures throughout their study session that showed her new awareness of his comfort levels. When she needed to point to something in his textbook, she asked if she could reach across rather than just doing it. When she laughed at one of his jokes, she didn't automatically reach out to touch his arm like she might have before. These small considerations didn't feel awkward or forced. Instead, they felt respectful and caring. David realized that this was what healthy boundary setting looked like. Not avoiding closeness altogether, but creating clear communication about what worked for everyone involved. As they packed up their materials around midnight, Lisa stretched and yawned. I actually feel pretty good about tomorrow's exam now. Thanks for going over all this stuff with me. Thanks for being patient with me earlier. David replied, I know that conversation got pretty intense for a while. I'm really glad we had it, Lisa said sincerely. I learned something important tonight. Not just about psychology, but about being a better friend. I never realized how much I assume about other people's comfort levels. As they walked toward the library exit together, David felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in social situations before. For the first time, he had successfully communicated about his boundaries without apologizing for them or feeling ashamed. And Lisa had responded with understanding rather than judgment. Hey, David, Lisa said as they reached the main doors, would it be okay if I gave you a high five? For surviving finals week and having a good study session, David smiled at her request. The fact that she had asked first made all the difference in the world. Instead of feeling caught off guard and uncertain, he felt prepared and in control of his response. Yeah, that would be nice. They exchanged a quick high five, and David was surprised to find that the physical contact felt completely comfortable and natural. The difference was consent and preparation, knowing what was coming and having the choice to participate willingly. Over the following weeks, David and Lisa's friendship continued to grow stronger. Lisa became more mindful of personal boundaries in all her relationships, not just with David. She realized that asking before initiating physical contact was a simple courtesy that made interactions more comfortable for everyone involved. For David, the experience opened up new possibilities for social connection. He began to understand that he wasn't broken or antisocial. He just needed communication and preparation around physical contact. This insight helped him in other relationships too. He started letting friends know about his preferences early in friendships, which prevented awkward misunderstandings and helped him feel more relaxed in social situations. 3 months later, during a group study session for their final psychology exam, something remarkable happened. Lisa was explaining a complicated concept to the group, and when she finally made it clear, David spontaneously reached over and gave her a brief congratulatory pat on the shoulder. "Thanks. That actually makes sense now," he said, not even realizing until afterward that he had initiated the physical contact himself. Lisa beamed at him, understanding the significance of the moment. David had reached a point where he felt comfortable and confident enough in their friendship to express appreciation through touch, on his own terms and in his own time. Later, as they walked out of the library together, Lisa reflected on how much they had both learned from that one awkward moment months earlier. What had started as a simple request for a place to sit had become a lesson in communication, respect, and the importance of understanding that people experience the world differently. For David, that night in the library had been a turning point. It was the first time he had successfully advocated for his own needs in a social situation, and it had shown him that healthy relationships could accommodate different comfort levels without anyone feeling rejected or misunderstood. Both of them carried these lessons into their future relationships, becoming more thoughtful friends and eventually more considerate partners. The awkward moment that had felt so overwhelming at the time had actually become the foundation for a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. Years later, they would still remember that evening as the night they learned that good communication could transform an uncomfortable situation into an opportunity for genuine connection and mutual respect.